Hey witches, Tiffany here on Bewitching.Bemused. I'm back with another book review. Haven't done one of these in a hot minute, and I'm back with one that I'm really excited about. This is a Victorian Grimoire by Patricia Telesco. This is much bigger and heftier than I anticipated, which is always exciting, including the afterword, the glossary, the bibliography, all of that. It is a total of 338 pages of magical deliciousness. Full disclosure, I did receive this copy for free from the publisher in exchange for an honest book review. But if you know me, that's why I love full transparency. I do try to be as unbiased as possible. Not 100% because I am human, but I like to make out a list of pros, cons, and a couple things that might be a pro or con depending on your taste. And I try to point out where I'm being a little biased. If you like this style of book review and you're looking for more books on magic and witchcraft and paganism, then head on over to my playlist of book reviews. Crossed Crow Books, who is the publisher for this, reached out to me and said, hey, take a look at our catalog, let us know if anything pops out to you, we'd like for you to do a book review. This one jumped out to me right away. I've always enjoyed the Victorian era in general, in arts, in stories, the style, the aesthetic, the superstitions, the overall tone of the times. It was a drastically and excitingly changing world in the midst of the Industrial Revolution. And yet, it was also very heavy with magic. Remember, this is a time period, like I said, heavy with superstition. It's about to overlap with the spiritualism movement. Divination was used as a common party trick. Tell me this isn't a fascinating time to study magic. And I feel like, this is just kind of a little area in the arena of witchcraft and in our community that I don't really see mentioned much. I have mentioned some overlap in Victorian customs regarding our Sabbats if you watch my history of the Sabbats videos, but there's so much more from the time to dive into that just really I haven't seen covered before. Just to lay you out with some context for, getting this book, the table of contents and the introduction alone got me excited. And by the way, if you are familiar with Dorothy Morrison, she writes the foreword for this. The introduction lays out basically what you should expect from the rest of the book. And if you'll allow me, I'd like to read a paragraph from it that I thought was just really great. If we were to define and describe for a moment a modern version of the Victorian enchantments, they would be unique and individual combinations of common sense, science, humor, herbalism, faith, cooking, creativity, and love. They are the sorts of things that spring from our everyday life, with few fancy words or rituals. Indeed, from this perspective, life itself becomes the ritual, and anything you add to that is like icing on the cake. This way of thinking also tends to promote the belief that anything which can be used should be used, so there is no waste. In this case, a witch with a modernized Victorian attitude is far more likely to use their athame, or sacred knife, as a cutting tool in the kitchen, in contrast to a tradition which puts it aside strictly for magical use, because it is clean, sharp, and available. And then it goes on to say that does not mean that high magic does not have its time and place. So just, if that's more your arena, don't skimp on this just because of what I just read to you. That section alone is both a pro of the book itself, as well as just a compliment to the style of practiced magic of the Victorian era. I love ritual in its proper time and place, but even more so, especially in magic, I love simplicity. I love the idea of using magic as a way of life, of it weaving itself into just how I go about my day-to-day routine. This is a personal bias, obviously. That's just how I live my life and how I practice magic. Sometimes I have the grander, richer, ceremonial high magic spells that I do, sure. The more elaborate rituals. But some people prefer to just make that the entirety of their practice. They like to keep the magical and the mundane completely separate, make magic sort of more special. And hey, there's nothing wrong with either one. I do suggest giving the book a read anyway, if you are that type of person. But like I said, that is sort of a personal bias, so I had to kind of put that in there. Let's start with the pros. You can tell a lot of time and care and research went into this book. The bibliography itself is 4 pages long. If you know me, you know I love a well-researched book. And now when it comes to witchcraft, it can't always be deeply researched, right? It's not a scientific study. However, this is in itself a type of history book, if you will. So yes, it should be pretty heavily researched, which it appears to be. One problem that I think these more niche books tend to suffer from, not necessarily this one, I'll get to that in a second, is that they try to cater to new practitioners a little too much. Now, when we look at niche books, these are more specific types of magic. And so sometimes in that regard, they're referred to as like advanced books, advanced magic, advanced witchcraft, right? Because the foundational books that set you up for a practice are introductory. So once you get that down, you start experimenting and moving into more advanced arenas and finding more specific niches along the way that interest you or work for you. However, I understand this is why I started this channel, was because for beginners, it's very difficult. There's so much out there and it can be hard. You know, of course, there's the like introductory books and there's this practitioner's guide and like those ones. But sometimes to get into the craft, you just find a book that calls to you and you don't know where it's at in this like, you know, imaginary witchcraft syllabus. And like I said, this book called out to me. So I could absolutely see this calling out to a brand new practitioner as well. There are absolutely basics that they need to go over and be informed of. Yes, you expect to find those in the beginner introductory books, but no, you don't want to read them over and over and over and over again in every single magic book you pick up. Like I said, I don't want beginners to be excluded, but as an experienced practitioner, it can be a real slog just skimming through a whole chapter or 3 because it's all foundational stuff that I know, that I learned and started practicing years ago. But I don't want to just skip the chapters entirely because there might be a couple little gems that are specific to the topic of the book in there. This book has the solution. Page 4. A special note for those of you who are new. Appendix A shares a little of the history of magic. Appendix B explains the basic tenets, tools, spells. The glossary supplies a working knowledge of magical terminology. You may want to read those first. Brilliant. Why doesn't every book do this? Every book that is not an introductory book needs to do this. I've complained about that in many, many book reviews, and to be fair, I've been a complainer and not a problem solver, but Patricia Telesco solved that problem for us. You'll know that I feel this way if you've watched, I don't know, even half a dozen of my videos probably, but I feel that definitely to understand the magic of an era, whether you're looking at the meanings of the runes, which I've covered, medieval occultism, the history of the Sabbats, which again, I've covered. You need to understand the context of its time. Instead of just compiling and publishing a book of Victorian spells and enchantments, which to be fair, still would have been delightful and very informative and really cool, Telesco brings us much more than that with this grimoire. She takes the time to give the reader a lay of the land, so to speak, the circumstances under which historically and regionally sometimes these spells, enchantments, ideas, divinations, and superstitions were being practiced and believed at the time. The first chapter is dedicated to showing the landscape of the Western world during the Victorian era. And the whole rest of the book is littered with little introductory tidbits as well. I find this fascinating. Some people don't. They find history not interesting, which is ridiculous. Your opinion is wrong. But regardless, whether you find something interesting or not, the better that you understand something, especially when it comes to spell work and magic, the better it's going to work for you. I've talked about this ad nauseum, the importance of understanding the correspondences behind spell ingredients that you're using, why you say certain things, why you do certain things. And so understanding what the correspondences contained in this book meant to Victorian people, it's going to help you recreate that. To add to that, throughout the book, Telesco provides thoughts on taking magical resources of the Victorian era and finding them a new home in our contemporary age. If you've ever read any other grimoire, whether that is the Lesser Key of Solomon or the Greek magical papyri, they contain rituals that in this day and age kind of seem just like, oh, how funny that they would have that. It's a little novelty. We wouldn't necessarily use them today because they don't really apply to us in the modern times. It's just an interesting historical tidbit we have no use for in our current day and age. But Telesco does attempt to bridge this gap between Victorian practitioners and us, their magical needs and ours. Now, because this book is so dense and there's so much content to it, I really, when I was writing my script and reading the book, I really did go through and start being like, I love this part and I love this section and I love that spell. And there is a lot I could say for that, but really, I think it's best if I just stick with those general pros of the book and just tell you, just go get it. There's so much. There's just so much content to this book that in itself is a huge pro as well. If I were to sit here breaking all that down, this would definitely not be a very balanced review, and you'd also probably get pretty bored. So now let's move on to the cons. First, and most importantly, there is a cure for freckles. Like, oh, do you want to be less pretty? Oh no, here's a spell for that. Okay, I'm just kidding. There is a remedy for that, but I know that this is a compilation from a time with very different beauty standards. It doesn't necessarily reflect the views of the author, and no, I didn't actually take it personally. Moving on. One thing is that this book is very heavy on its references to Wicca. For instance, that special note in the very beginning, page 4, that directs beginning practitioners to the appendix to get a little bit of foundational information. I personally omitted parts of it as I was reading it to you. It does say, for those of you who are new to Wicca, Appendix B explains the basic tenets of Wicca. In my opinion, the appendix as a whole is still a pro though, because despite the Wicca color added to it, it does still cover those basic tenets of tools, charging, blessing, cleansing, how to cast a spell, etc. Now, I'm going to assume that the author, Patricia Telesco, is Wiccan, and you know what? That's totally okay. I get it. This book is written from a Wiccan perspective. Nothing wrong with that per se. And to be fair, Telesco does point out that this style of magic, meaning Victorian magic, can fit in with any path or tradition. The only issue that I have with this is that Victorian magic, in my opinion, should be taught in a secular fashion. As always, Wicca, paganism, that sort of thing is a religious or faith-based practice. Witchcraft and magic is secular. It is a Venn diagram. There is a lot of crossover. But in case you don't know, you don't have to practice magic to be a pagan or a Wiccan. You also don't have to be a pagan or a Wiccan in order to practice magic. Because this is not a Wiccan book, I do think having those introductory bits, like I said, flavored or colored with a little bit of Wiccan seasoning could be a little bit confusing to a newer practitioner. I know for a lot of people that difference, that defining line between Wicca, paganism, and witchcraft is very confusing. And this is kind of why. This is not the only book that does that sort of thing, where the lines get really blurry, but it does contribute to a problem that I see very commonly in our community. I know it's one thing that I found very, very confusing as a brand new practitioner myself. And how do we know for a fact that Victorians, the Victorian people, were not practicing Wicca? Wicca was not founded for like another 4 decades until after the Victorian era ended. So if any of you are a beginner watching this video, please note, magic, the practice of magic, witchcraft can be a part of a religious or faith-based practice, but does not have to be. Wicca is a religion that happens to contain magical practice. The Victorian people, their practice of magic very likely had nothing or very little to do with religion. So we'll just leave it at that. Another con is that this book could be massively improved with a very helpful index. The chapters themselves and the table of contents are organized very, very well. And for the most part, they're organized into the type of magic, such as herbalism or divination or magic for the home. But given that I tend to consider grimoires and spellbooks to be reference books, I love having an index in the back where you can search for a spell or a practice or a charm, an enchantment, a ritual based on your intention. For instance, say I have a piece of jewelry and I might ask myself, okay, what could this piece of jewelry be enchanted for? It's a ring, it's silver and black onyx, so based on those things, what magical properties might it already have? And sometimes I have an intention, something that I want to manifest in my life, and I'd like to find a piece of jewelry, right, to go with that intention. So I like having the option to do like a reverse search, so to speak. And this is not just like a con of this book, but of a lot of magical books that I would consider reference books. I'm like, please make it super easy for me to find exactly what I want. Because after I read through it once, it's going to go on the shelf until I need to just reference from it. So as an example, there is a section on decorative and symbolic materials, and it's organized by the type of material. So there's this section on metals, for instance, right? And it lists several different types of metals and their correspondences, their magical uses, such as tin is for good fortune, copper is great for energy and focus, lead is for grounding, and so on. But I would love an index where I can say, I really need something for grounding. Let's look at everything in the book that says would be good for grounding or good focus or good fortune, right? And then the index would tell me, hey, for focus, there's something on page 16 and page 22 and page 89 and so on, whatever. Okay, as you can see, I have no cons about the core content of this book. So please know that for the most part, I absolutely loved this book. It's fantastic. If the Victorian era is interesting to you whatsoever, or you just are looking to branch out in your magic a little, get a little creative, find something new and interesting, I highly recommend this book. I do want to cover one personal bias just before we end this video. I have to say, the incantations in this book are absolutely beautiful. I've read a lot of spell books and I found them to be complete poetry in this book. Now, of course, poetry and art and incantations are very subjective, so you may not agree with me, but I mean, they're stunning. I don't normally use pre-written spells. And when I do, I definitely alter them, both the ingredients as well as the incantations, to fit my purpose, to suit my very specific situation and circumstances. 9 times out of 10, that's what I do. But Telesco's I found so beautiful, and some of them were just like moving. I got like almost emotional reading them, that I can honestly say I would change very little, if anything at all, and it would only just be to fit my circumstances just a little bit more exact. But I personally found a very deep connection with her writing that just really resonated with me. Her invocations for the Sabbats in particular, I found so poetic and moving. They really struck an emotional chord for me that I'm going to take note of them. You guys, if you know me, you know I have a very particular practice for a lot of the Sabbats, my own personal deep connection, and now I have found these new sort of prayers that I'm going to incorporate into them. And of course, the book is littered with incantations, so that's just a few of them. You may not agree with me, or you might. I just wanted to put it out there as just part of my book review because it just touched me. And my compliments to the author, that's for sure. Anyway, that's it for today. I want to say thank you to Patricia Telesco for this wonderful, huge book of content. There's so much in it that I have not experimented with or tried yet that I'm still very excited about. I want to thank Cross Crow Books for the book, giving it to me so I could do this book review. And of course, you guys, the viewers, thank you so much for watching. If you're looking for more book reviews, you can check them out right here. This book is linked down below in the description box to be purchased on Amazon or directly through Cross Crow Books. And if you're just here because you are a history buff and you're interested in the history of the Sabbats, you can check out that playlist right there. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.